Tonight on Reel to Reel, we'll take a long look at how a Catholic agency has helped rebuild earthquake-ravaged Mexico City.
Monsignor Daniel Murray will advise us on today's scripture readings.
And Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons has advice for married couples when they don't see eye to eye. All that and more tonight. Hello, I'm Father Dave McGowan.
And I'm Jane Rudolph. Welcome to Reel to Reel.
Good evening. Our first story tonight takes us to Mexico City, where we'll see how the inhabitants there were forced to start from the ground up to overcome tragedy and to build an optimistic future. In 1985, Mexico City experienced the worst natural disaster in its history. A devastating earthquake struck, killing thousands and leaving many survivors with nothing.
Government rehabilitation efforts were ineffective. Even a year after the disaster, few people were able to establish new permanent houses. It wasn't until Catholic Relief Services intervened that the people of Mexico City began to rebuild their lives.
Relying on the abilities of the Mexican people, Catholic Relief Services allocated funds to initiate a rehabilitation program. With the manpower coming from the people within the community, reconstruction was undertaken with personal interest and pride.
Thanks to the aid of Catholic Relief Service, its volunteers, and the hard work of the Mexican people themselves, Mexico City is well on its way to recovery.
Mexico City, September 19th, 1985 at approximately 7:19 a.m. A major earthquake, measuring 8.1 on the Richter scale, struck with incredible devastation. The quake was so violent that tall buildings trembled in Texas, water sloshed in Colorado pools, and the entire earth vibrated like a struck bell. The following day, another aftershock, measuring 7.6 on the Richter scale, sent terrifying tremors through an already crippled city. At least 9,000 people were killed, 30,000 or more were injured, and more than 100,000 became homeless in a city already short of decent housing. To complicate matters, the nation was staggering under a $97 billion foreign debt. This was the worst natural disaster in the history of Mexico. September 19th, 1986. Here's how it looked 1 year later. The scars of destruction still remain. Non-government officials say the death toll was more like 30,000 people. Another 30,000 are still homeless, although some say it's more like 90,000 without homes. Critics say the Mexican government has done little to resolve their plight, and the foreign debt continues to worsen. You could say it's an economic earthquake in what is now the largest city in the world, 17 million people. The government has built 278 camps like this one. About 20,000 families reside in these rectangular dwellings. The roofs are simply corrugated sheet metal, roughly the size of a one-car garage. About 20 families share bathroom facilities, which are located in a corner of the camp. Most cooking is done with gas stove hookups. All wash is done by hand, again, many times in a central location. In every dwelling we visited, there are pictures of Jesus and the Blessed Mother. The Mexican government claims it has already built and given apartments to 8,000 families. An estimated 70,000 people still live in damaged buildings. The government claims it has 3 reconstruction programs which will benefit 83,000 families. They say all 83,000 people should be taken care of by the end of next year. The government says it will also have a new housing code this fall. Some residents feel that corruption may have contributed to the collapse of many buildings. Construction firms have been accused of cutting corners in return for kickbacks from government officials. A large number of public buildings did collapse, but so far, no one has been prosecuted. Some residents are charging criminal negligence. They say it took the government 8 months to even begin construction. Meanwhile, in the Los Angeles parish, here's how it looks with construction funded by Catholic Relief Services. CRS began work just 6 weeks after the earthquake. CRS started by sending emergency funds to the Mexican church, as well as cooperating with local groups in erecting temporary shelters. What you're looking at is a CRS-funded project called the Colony of Morales, located on Mexicalco Street. 54 families will live here. The pastor of the Los Angeles parish is Jesuit Padre Ciro Najera.
Bueno, yo estaba a punto de celebrar la misa cuando de momento sentí el temblor, un temblor que nunca había sentido.
Well,
con mucha fuerza.
I was getting ready to celebrate Mass when all of a sudden I felt a tremor. It was stronger than anything I've ever felt before. I then got ready to leave, and it was something terrible.
Hemos tenido mucha ayuda.
We have certainly gotten much help. In my parish, the money sent by Catholic Relief Services has been used basically for the construction of houses. Actually, there are different areas where the construction is going on. Homes for 120 families are being constructed. So the monetary help has been used mainly for the construction of homes. Also, the help has been given for supplies and food, which is what we have tried to channel. Also, we have tried to channel that money to form groups of cooperatives. And so, in these ways, we have used the aid we have been provided.
Relief money which goes into the government passes through several different sources. The government may hire an outside construction firm to build its building, while Catholic Relief Services relies on people who live within that very same community. The philosophy here is that they will take more pride in their work. Catholic Relief Services received a total of $8 million in aid for the earthquake victims. CRS's 3-year program of construction and rehabilitation will see more than 1,200 housing units created by the middle of next year. 807 will be finished this year. 2,100 will be the total built by March of 1988. Most have 2 bedrooms with 1 bath and a porch. 85-year-old Margarita Ledesma and her husband Esteban Oliveros have been barely hanging on for the past year since their housing project collapsed during the earthquake.
No me levantaba todavía cuando el temblor, ay que, pero después me paré y no sabía ni qué hacer. Estaba yo como loca.
I hadn't even gotten out of bed when the tremor came. I stood up and didn't know what to do. I felt like a crazy person. Instead of staying indoors, I went outside, and everything stayed inside the house. I didn't care about anything. I just wanted to get out. I was afraid the house would fall on me.
Ahorita pues estoy
completamente regular.
Now I am normal, but I am sick in my spine. I fell down and hurt my spine, and it doesn't permit me to walk around as usual. For me, God is there. For us, He is everything. We are Catholics. We have faith in God. He is the one who helps us.
Tenemos fe en Dios. Y es el que nos ayuda.
Don't go away. We're going to take a short break.
But when we come back, we'll continue our look at Mexico City's success.
The House of Charity can be found at work throughout South Jersey, wherever there is suffering and distress. Through its agencies, compassionate care goes to the elderly. The needy receive food and clothing. Special education programs administered to the mentally handicapped. Expectant mothers receive pre- and postnatal care, and medical services are rendered to the ill. Support the House of Charity in South Jersey. Touch someone's life with love.
Religion and deep faith in Mexico. Its signs are everywhere. There are 72 million Catholics in Mexico. By comparison, there are 52 million in the United States. While we were in Mexico City, a special one-year anniversary Mass was held at the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. It was held in commemoration of those who were killed in the earthquake. Cardinal Ernesto Caripio Ahumada had invited Bishop Rene Gracida of Corpus Christi to help him celebrate the Mass, along with other bishops and clergy from Mexico. It was a beautiful event, lined with heavy emotion. Bishop Gracida said they prayed for the repose of the souls of those who died. They prayed for the well-being of those who were orphaned and injured, and those who lost their jobs and homes. An estimated 5,000 to 7,000 people attended.
It was the first anniversary of the death of maybe 30, 40, 50,000 people. No one really knows for sure, even at this point, how many people died in the terrible earthquake of September 19, 1985. At the offertory, there was an extended procession with people bringing up various symbolic gifts. I think the most important aspect of the gifts that were brought up is that most of the gifts that were brought up were produced by the cooperatives which have been established by Catholic Relief Services to provide people with not only gainful employment, but with a certain amount of self-determination for their lives.
The name of the entire CRS effort here is called Rebuilding Together. About 300 people will soon be moving into this complex on Taller Street. Bishop Gracida toured the area.
Yo soy Monseñor René Gracida, Obispo de Corpus Christi in Texas.
There are 15 bishops who serve on the board of directors for Catholic Relief Services. Not only is Bishop Gracida on the board, but he's chairman of the Latin American Regional Committee.
The Mexican people have maintained a faith and a hope in spite of tremendous difficulties. These people still maintain a faith in themselves, faith in their God, a faith in their nation, and a hope for the future, which I can't help but find very admirable.
The work you see here is another CRS community effort. These people sometimes labor round the clock to try to get their lives back in order. Bishop Gracida feels there's a lesson to be learned here.
Mexican pride is a reality, and it is something that the people in the United States must recognize and must come to grips with. The people of Mexico are as sophisticated, as educated, and as progressive in their own way as we are in the United States, even more so because they have succeeded in retaining here in Mexico certain fundamental Judeo-Christian values which we are in the process of losing more and more in the United States, such as the value of the family, the family integrity, the necessity of members of the family assisting one another, the extended family.
Catholic Relief Services bases its programs on the gospel mandate, translated into a statement of purpose. We have just witnessed their response to the human needs and suffering of the disadvantaged in Mexico City. But this is nothing new. CRS has been helping out since 1943, when bishops in the U.S. started it as War Relief Services. CRS overseas operations are in progress in 70 countries around the world. It has touched millions of lives.
Sí, hace un año que tuvimos un fuerte terremoto aquí en México.
Yes, it's been a year since we had a strong earthquake. All of Texas and many other parts of the world help us. And on behalf of my country, I give you all thanks. I am an humble person and very thankful to everyone. We are all brothers. Thanks to God that you help us. And blessed be those who help us. Thank you. I am Humberto Gomez Diaz. Thank you, Texas. Thank you, Catholic Church. Thank you, Catholic Relief Service. Thank you.
Gracias.
What's most admirable about the people of Mexico City is that their faith in God and themselves remained strong even when everything around them was destroyed.
And because of donations from people like you and me, Catholic Relief Service was able to help them build a new life.
Catholic Relief Service always welcomes assistance. If you'd like to help the work of CRS, have a pen ready. We'll have our address at the end of the show.
But right now, we have Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons waiting in the wings to talk about marriage and how to handle those little disagreements that husbands and wives encounter.
On The Honeymooners, Ralph and Alice argued frequently. Now, we're not certain exactly why they argued. Perhaps Ralph was upset with the other drivers of cars and buses in Brooklyn. Maybe Alice was upset also because her mother called her and got her upset, or one of her neighbors hurt her. There were times when we found their arguing to be somewhat amusing, especially when Ralph threatened to send Alice on a trip to the moon. But you know, in real life, marital arguing is not amusing. In fact, marital arguing is the #1 issue that brings couples into therapy. Anger is the #1 reason that causes marriages to end, and that is not amusing at all. It's important to understand that in loving relationships, there are 2 types of actively expressed anger. The first type is justified anger. The second type is misdirected anger, anger which is excessive. Most couples do this at times in their loving relationships. That is, they misdirect their anger. And the reason they do it is this, that in growing up, we have multiple hurts and disappointments. Most of us tend to bury that, to swallow it, to pretend that it really didn't happen, that we really weren't hurt in the past or on a daily basis. Then what happens, all this pain that's buried gets stirred up at times and becomes misdirected at the person we love the most. It may be at the end of the day, it may be when we perceive ourselves not being loved enough, it may be over a holiday. It happens in multiple times in a loving relationship. It's very important, therefore, to try to decrease misdirected anger, to try to decrease anger in a marriage so that love can continue to flow in the relationship. One major way to do that is to appreciate that when you're upset with your spouse, you're first disappointed and second, you're angry, so that you don't always have to express the anger. You can go back here and express a disappointment in a calm and a rational way. There are many benefits to doing this. The first is that anger blocks the flow of love. Words spoken in anger upset a person, whereas if you say to your spouse, gee, I'm disappointed, they can hear that much more easily than if you say, I'm angry with you and I'm upset with you. You see, anger spoken to a spouse tends to make the spouse defensive, to pull back, to put up walls. So oftentimes they don't even hear what you're saying. Also, angry words wound. and they can wound deeply. These words are not forgotten, whereas words spoken in regards to disappointment can be heard and don't wound. Also, angry words insult the spouse. They can make them feel inferior and defensive. I would just ask you, when you feel upset with your spouse, to think about expressing disappointment rather than anger, because anger is going to block the flow of love in your loving relationship, and that flow of love is essential to your happiness.
Thanks for joining us tonight, Doctor. We'll be right back after a short break. A few weeks ago, we at Reel to Reel began an appeal for your financial support. Many of you responded generously, and we wholeheartedly thank you. Because of that, we're able to continue to bring you our show every week. However, we still need and appreciate your continued support. As you know, for the past 5 seasons, we've been able to bring you this weekly show, requesting only your cards and letters in return. If you're a new viewer, or if you've enjoyed the message of Reel to Reel over these past years, we'd like to thank you for watching and invite you to participate in this venture by actively supporting the show. Today, with costs rising all around us, we need your financial support. A donation of $5, $10, $20, or whatever you can send would help ensure the continued presence of this program. Send your contributions to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, PA 19103, and thank you for your help. You know, it seems as if we're all too often caught in worrying about the future, and that's perfectly normal, even necessary. But when that concern turns into anxiety, it interferes with how we live today.
And that's precisely the message of today's scripture readings. Right now, here's Monsignor Daniel Murray with some insight on how we can enrich our lives by living one day at a time.
Parents do not have it easy. They must provide food for their children. There will be crying and groaning if it isn't available 3 times a day. Then there is the clothing. There is the usual complaining over hand-me-downs. There is even embarrassment if everyone else is always wearing the newest styles. Allowances are another modern-day fact of life. There are dances and parties to attend. There are pizzas and fast food and junk food to be eaten. Let's not forget tuition and doctor bills and mortgages and car payments and birthdays and Christmas. Also, throw into the pot the fact that the parents themselves have lives to live on the social level and in the business world. It all costs. These responsibilities, combined with tense international and national political scenes, produce quite a few anxious lives. Not only do parents have to worry about where the next dollar will come from, they also have uneasy moments about the future. Will someone push a button and plunge the world into nuclear holocaust? Parents who can identify with all this are no doubt consoled by the conclusion of today's gospel reading. Let tomorrow take care of itself. Today has troubles enough of its own. This conventional wisdom rings true. All want to believe it and live by it. Jesus is asking us to step off the treadmill for a while. There is something deeper to life than all this worry and anxiety. Is not life more than food? Is not your person more valuable than clothes? We cannot be so taken up with the world that we forget how to be children dependent on God, who loves us with a mother's love and provides for us with a father's care. A weekend retreat or a day of recollection would help us establish some equilibrium in our lives. We are to help God in the work of creation. How can we do this if our every waking moment is filled with worry and anxiety? Unhinged from our center God, we fall apart, and our world with us.
Thanks, Monsignor. Few artistic works can compare with the simplistic beauty of stained glass windows. On a bright summer day, stained glass windows can look almost as if they were painted by the sun itself.
For our final story tonight, we'll go to Florida to meet Trilby Wallace, a woman who, working with crayons and markers, produces glass depictions of biblical events for her parish.
In the daytime, when you walk into a church, the glass commands your attention. It is the brightest, the most brilliant, the most beautiful thing you see.
For 4 years, Trilby Wallace, a parishioner of the Church of Our Savior, accepted an awesome responsibility. The responsibility to produce stained glass windows that would be a permanent part of the worship of thousands of people.
Religious art, there's so many things to say. You deal with people on gut levels. Their tragedies, their joys, their sorrows. I feel a great responsibility in that respect because people look at the work and they incorporate it into their own prayer life. They incorporate it into their own conceptualization of their own Christianity.
Trilby's windows depict the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus in a contemporary Florida coast setting. Her intent is to help worshipers understand the humanity of Jesus, who shared their same hopes, fears, and aspirations. Her workshop is a room that once served as the children's bedroom.
You start with the window itself and start making the sketches. And once you get a sketch colored up basically the way you want it, you then take the sketch and blow it up to the full size of the window panels themselves. And I did that with an overhead projector, put a piece of paper on the wall, and trace off the full-size patterns. From then, it's like almost making a dress. You cut out the pattern pieces and select the colors of glass that you want. Glue the piece of paper down on the color glass, let that set. At that point, you're ready to cut. I have special machines that are made to cut this thick glass, and they just cut right around the paper pattern. I think it's just the sheer beauty of it. When the sun comes through the windows, it's just so beautiful you can hardly stand it. It's like listening to beautiful music. It is my hope that any person, male or female, young or old, happy or sad, believing or unbelieving, that any person looking at this work will see himself in it. At that point, this work is not my work, it is ours.
Trilby Wallace has found fulfillment in her role as a stained glass artist because, as she has said, with religious art, there's so much to say.
And if you have something you'd like to say to us, then please write to us. Reel to Reel, 222 North 17th Street, room 907, Philadelphia, PA, 19103.
Or call us during business hours at area code 215-668-9842.
Join us next week for a look at an all-natural chapel.
We'll meet a rebel who dedicates her time to help the poor of New Jersey.
And Mike Gallagher will have something to say about liberal Catholics. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll be looking for you next week again. Good night.
Good night. And remember, Jesus is Lord.
Are you involved in charismatic renewal?
Would you like to know more about it?
Or are you just curious? If your answer is yes, we have a special day for you. Saturday, March 28th at Cardinal O'Hara High School in Springfield.
The day begins at 9 a.m. with over 35 seminars and ends with the liturgy.
The cost is just $5. For more information, call 668-HOPE.